I wanted to congratulate you all. You were the brave ones that got through the rain, and you are the lucky ones because you're going to have an opportunity tonight to hear a dialogue between Nina and Ellen, and what's going to be a fascinating discussion. Talk about breaking glass ceilings. What, a 200-year-old company, and Ellen was the first female CEO and chairman of this, and so I think we should celebrate that, huh? I think we're in an era now where we're breaking glass ceilings, and I think it would be easy to discount how hard and challenging that has been. And so I rather suspect we'll get into a little bit of that tonight, but it's not going to last long because you're going to find out she's one of the most competent CEOs I've had a chance to listen to. We've just been talking briefly about not only things she did when she was at DuPont, but things that she's now doing, and she's fully still engaged, and we're lucky for that. So I'll say thank you to all of you. When we have events for the public, we always do a little safety announcement in advance, and I hereby designate Kath Hicks. She's going to be responsible for your safety tonight, in case anything happens. Nothing's going to happen, but I just want you to know she's going to be the one that'll guide you. The exit will be right back here where we came in, and the stairs take us right down to the street. We'll meet across at National Geographic if we have an issue, but I don't want you to worry about it. Everything is going to be just fine. And I do want to say special thanks to our friends at Citi who make this possible. Kristen, I want to say thank you to you. I mean, it allows us to present a dimension of leadership in Washington that just doesn't otherwise have a venue. And you've been very instrumental in helping us bring this program and with Nina. I just want to say thank you to you. Kristen, can I ask you, Kristen Solheim, come up here and just say a few words. Take the stairs over there. Whoa! Good on you.
Hi. Thank you, Dr. Hamre. And thank you to all of us for joining us today for another in the series of Smart Women, Smart Power. Citi's proud sponsor of these events, which have brought together some fascinating women from the Secretary of Air Force, Deborah Lee James, to former Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard. And tonight is no exception. We have one of the country's most formidable business leaders joining us, Ellen Kullman. Thanks for being here. As the chair and CEO of DuPont, Ellen spearheaded the country's global transformation, overseeing operations in nearly 100 countries and a workforce of more than 50,000 people. Citi has a long history with DuPont, and we are keenly aware of how they view science, engineering, research, and development to change and improve our lives. Did you know DuPont invented Lycra, Kevlar, neoprene, and the fabric that created pantyhose? I don't know if I'm so happy about that one. We're grateful Ellen could be here, and there's no better person to moderate the discussion than Nina Easton. Thanks for being here, and enjoy.
Great, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm the end of the wind-up. I'm Kathleen Hicks. I direct the International Security Program here at CSIS, and I'm so privileged to get to also lead the Smart Women, Smart Power initiative. Just a couple of reminders, as we have noted up here. Be sure to follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @SmartWomen. And check out our Smart Women podcast and our Smart Women iTunes University course, which Apple named one of the best of 2015. We're hopeful for 2016. We are, of course, honored to have Ellen Kullman join us tonight. It's going to be a great conversation covering, as John said, not just her work leading a Fortune 500 company, but also some of the key policy issues that are so important to her, including free trade and STEM education. And as always, thank you to our moderator, the erstwhile CSIS Senior Associate Nina Easton, who also chairs Fortune's Most Powerful Women International Summit and is the co-chair of the Fortune Global Forum. So without further ado, thank you all for joining us tonight, and over to Nina.
Great. Thanks so much, Kath. So we are really, truly honored to have Ellen here. Ellen, so a couple things you need to know about Ellen. She was on our Fortune Most Powerful Women list, ranking number 15 a couple of times, number 5 a couple of times, and she's also been ranked as the 31st most powerful woman in the world. But it didn't start that way.
No.
Ellen's father was a landscape a landscaper, owned a landscape company, and he made you pull weeds, I think, as I recall.
Oh, I had to pull weeds. I was the flag girl on a state highway department project. I sold from a farm stand vegetables in the summer, and they sold Christmas trees in the winter to fill an income, and I was the cashier. So good with math, I guess. So it helped my math skills.
Oh, so you're good with math. You're okay. You're always good.
math.
So you're always good at science and math.
Yeah,
That was a comfort zone for you.
It was, and you know, things like the moonshot. I grew up in that era when we all wanted to be astronauts. That's just what we wanted to be.
Really?
My parents used to laugh at that, but you know, we all wanted to be astronauts.
So describe the day that we landed on the moon. I remember it
Oh,
because
yeah.
you guys don't, because you're too young. We're too old. But go ahead, tell us.
Well, you know, it's just that you're glued to the TV for hours, and you're looking at all these men and the couple of women that are in the Houston Space Center, and you know, and the commentators are giving you the blow by blow, and you're just sitting there and you're trying to, you know, you're on pins and needles because we never did this before. So, you know, can it actually land? I mean, so I'm like a little kid, right? So I don't even know the science behind this, but I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And just, I think, a proud moment for our country to be able to do that feat in that short amount of time.
And it got through to you, a girl, and I think that this is a thread through all of this because you ended up going to school at Tufts in mechanical engineering.
By the way, I had bad eyesight, so I couldn't be an astronaut. So forget,
you wanted to be an astronaut
forget Purdue,
at first.
so that was not going to work out.
But you looked into that. I mean, that was your.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I wouldn't pass the physical because I wore glasses. So I had to figure out something else to do.
So it was why mechanical engineering?
Because I hated chemistry, and this is funny because I ran DuPont. I think chemistry was hard, but the mechanical stuff I was always drawn to. And it was more interesting than civil and the electrical stuff. Well, I blew up a Wheatstone bridge my first week in the electrical engineering course, so I figured that wouldn't be a good major. So, it was a comfort zone for me, statics and dynamics and bridges and buildings and fluid mechanics and all that kind of stuff like that. It was just, you know, a comfort zone.
And were there many girls? Young women
there were
in that?
3 of us.
Mm-hmm.
3.
Out of?
Oh, it's the engineering school. There's about 400.
So there are 3 of you out of 400.
Yeah,
in
and the other 2
school.
women weren't Native American U.S. One was Venezuelan, whose country sent her there to school so she could work on the big dam project in the southern part of the country. The other one was from Europe. So.
From Europe, you said.
Yeah.
So you were the only American girl in an engineering school of 400. Mm-hmm. Wow. What was that like?
Well, you know, I didn't go to MIT because I felt like the environment there was just so large and male-dominated, and I wanted a school, and my advisor in high school really helped me with this, that had both liberal arts and an engineering school, so that if I didn't like engineering, I could always transfer and be a math major or do something else like that. So I liked it because the environment was 50-50 men, women. I just happened to be in classes with guys all the time, but I was a tomboy. So that was not, I had 2 brothers, so this was not uncomfortable for me. It was uncomfortable for the professors more so than it was me because this was totally new ground. They hadn't taught many women before. And so.
So how did that manifest itself?
You know, do you really want to be an engineer? You know, isn't this hard? Wouldn't you rather do? I mean, so some of them were fine. Others were dismissive. Some ignored me totally. So, but you figured it out. The head of the engineering school was, I think, pretty supportive of making those changes. And this is in the mid '70s. So, and so it was. It just like water off a duck's back.
And your
you just
parents
ignored
supported
it.
you in this?
My parents, you know, they are wonderful people. My mother graduated from college. My father never did. They had no idea what I was up against. They just said, "How are your grades, dear?" "Fine." "Okay, good." "Yeah, we saw them. They came in the mail.
Yeah.
They look
Message to all of you helicopter parents.
Yeah.
This is like-
I know.
this
Michael
is
and I
this is
were
what it
like,
used
you
to
know,
be.
it's like,
Yeah.
you know, where are you going to apply to school?
Oh,
that's nice, honey. Yeah. The typewriter's downstairs if you want to type your, you know, your application.
We might have been better off then.
Yeah.
And then you went off and you got a master's in business at Kellogg.
I did. I went back at night because I was poor.
Because you're bored.
I was poor. And,
Oh, you're poor.
Yeah, no, I didn't have a lot of resources. So my company was paying for it if I went back at night. They wouldn't pay for it if I went back full time. So I went back 2 to 3 nights a week and for 2.5, almost 3 years, and got my MBA. And I realized I was in sales because I realized I would not last long behind a design desk. I mean, this is when you were drawing designs by hand on vellum, on things like that. And so I found out that you could sell for technical products, and that was fun. So I went into the sales arena, and then I realized I knew nothing about product, price, promotion, selling strategy, anything. I didn't, financial statements, I didn't know much how to read, so I said, this is limiting. So I went back to school and got
And where were you working then when you were?
I was working for Westinghouse in Chicago.
Okay. So you knew you needed to marry those business skills. Did you think you were going to run a company someday?
The funniest thing is I remember when, right after I got married, Mike and I were both at GE in Connecticut, and my first boss there, we were out having a drink on Friday night after work, and the joke was I was either going to run a small country or company. And I kept saying, what are you guys talking about? No way. There's no way I'm going to do that. And I think people saw it in me before I saw it in myself.
That's interesting. You didn't have the confidence, or you just didn't have the vision, or you were just bossy?
Apparently I was bossy, but
this is a Sheryl Sandberg line,
yeah, apparently I was.
Yeah, bossy.
I think I never looked that far out. I mean, I think I always took my life, my career in like 4 or 5 year tranches. Maybe that was high school, and then it was college, and then it was your entry-level job, and going back and getting my master's, and then, and then when I ended up at DuPont, I just kind of found
How
a
old were you
home.
when you ended up at DuPont?
32.
Okay.
32.
DuPont, which was in the same state you grew up,
It
Delaware.
was, yeah.
Small state.
Yeah.
Okay.
Small state.
Sorry, I interrupted you. So 32,
No,
you're 32.
It was 32, and Mike and I moved to Wilmington, and first, DuPont was a hard transition because the culture was so different than GE. And it's not about bad or good, it's just different.
How so?
GE, it was all about, kind of the loudest voice got heard. It was, they would bang each other about the head and shoulders with a stick all day long, and they'd go out and have a beer together afterwards, and it was all fine. I mean, it was just a tough culture, and you had to be tough to be in that culture. At DuPont, if you were tough, they could freeze you out pretty quick. It was a gentlemanly
family
culture, kind of a family culture. And it's not that you didn't have to do tough things, you just did them in a different way. And so, you had to, if you wanted the company to change something it was doing, you had to honor what it did well, for your small group. Honor what they do well, and they'll follow you anywhere. And I learned that within the first year there, and kind of used that as a way to coalesce groups and make change and make progress and do a lot of really fun things, as
like,
product line manager and new mammography film in the X-ray, the medical business that DuPont had. We had a small team of us that kind of took over an area that was losing a lot of money, and our job was to get it to break even and to fix it. And we had a small team that worked together on that. And, it was hard stuff, but we were doing it together and had a great team and watched out for each other's back and just created value. And, so it was kind of one challenge after another.
And DuPont, I think of it as a chemical company, but in fact, it's, as you've said, a science company, and it's obviously very involved in issues like food security and so forth now.
So what people didn't know is that 40% of DuPont's revenues in 2015 was agriculture, close to 40%. And agriculture, food, ingredients, the two of those. And then another 40% were things like big polymers, advanced materials.
Pantyhose kind of things.
No, we had sold that off by then. This was more like car parts and
right.
things like that. The lightweighting of vehicles, so you're replacing, the plastics would last longer than the metal. And your powertrain's mostly plastic today, and that's what lightens the car, which is what gives you additional gas mileage. That was the first whole tranche of how they improved the efficiency of cars. And then there was some specialty businesses. like in biotechnology for industrial uses and things like that. So it was a very different company when I left than when I started there 27 years before.
And of course, food, seeds, and so forth.
Seeds, crop protection chemical.
Talk about that.
Yeah, I didn't know, I grew up on the industrial side of the business, so when I became CEO, I needed to immerse myself in the ag side because it was clear to me that ag was going to be a very large and very powerful part of the company. We had bought Pioneer Seed about 8 or 10 years before I became CEO. And for all the fanfare that our competitors had announced the death of crop protection chemicals, biotechnology was going to improve the seeds so much that you wouldn't need insecticides or you wouldn't need herbicides or fungicides in order to get the most out of your crop. But in fact, biotech had a great opportunity to increase yield and increase farmer income. But it had to be then partnered with, because insects, weeds, fungus are very interesting little organisms, and they're hard to kill. So they'll figure out a way, right? And they get, resistance builds up. So the old stuff doesn't work. So we had a very prolific crop protection chemical group that invented novel mode of action insecticide. It's called Rynaxypyr. We didn't actually do well on the branding side, if you can tell by Rynaxypyr, Cyazypyr. I could go on. Pacoxystrobin. It took me a while to be able to even spell that one. But novel chemistries, novel things like that actually you could use tiny amounts of to have great efficacy, and they were great. They were safe for humans, better for the environment. So we kind of had a renaissance in our crop protection chemical business in the past decade, and it was a wonderful business. Farmers, I met farmers all around the world. I've walked fields in just about every country you can imagine. Anything from, farming, subsistence farmers in sub-Saharan Africa that were still using open pollination seeds. They weren't even to hybrids, right, which our country had been using for 50 years kind of thing, to India, where it's land rights, or China, where, they have 11 moos, and a moo is a piece of land. If maybe 10 is a hectare, right? So they're small farmers, they're eking out a living, their focus is, how do I educate my kids? How do I make enough money in farming? Yeah. So I'm just not using it to survive. I'm using it, and I can, as an income, I can educate my children. And and it's as different. The science is global, but the application of it is very local, and culture matters. Farming in the United States is a business today. Farming outside of the United States is very much part of the cultural aspects of a country, and you have to respect that. And you have to work with it in order to be able to make it come out in the right place.
So, as you know, CSIS has a very impressive, in my mind, food security program. What do you think the private sector and companies like DuPont should be doing more of to improve food security? Let's talk about price spikes we've seen. Let's talk about climate change looking forward. What should the private sector be doing?
I'm a believer that when governments put in false regulations to either limit a price or to change something or to amass stockpiles, and as opposed to letting it move freely, it creates have and have-nots and creates a lot of issues in the world. So you need the regulations to come out in the right place to allow trade to move. And because that's where you're going to create the most food at the lowest cost for the most people. And so I think where did we see there were some examples of trade not moving in the last, Well, there have been upsets where countries all of a sudden who can't get enough for themselves, especially with China coming into the market and buying up a lot of stocks, and the stocks to use went down and prices went up in the latter part of the last decade, or even actually in 12 and 13. There were a couple of droughts and flooding, and so stocks to use went down, prices go up. You get a couple of good seasons, stocks to use go up, prices come down. It is a pure commodity. But I think one of the things that companies need to do is realize that governments have a right to choose the technology that's employed in their country around things, around everything, but especially things like farming. And we have to do a better job of educating populations and governments about what is good or what's bad or indifferent about certain technologies that can improve outcomes. And whether a country chooses to use it or not, that's up to them. But I do think that we have to do a better job, get the histrionics and the hyperbole out of the way, and let's focus on facts, and let's be very transparent about it. And I think there was a lot of concern that when the new technologies came in, and this is 20 years ago, that there wasn't a lot of transparency. And so I think, because we did, quite frankly, the industry did a poor job of marketing it. And I think we've gotten a lot better at that. DuPont, I guess it was 5 years ago now, partnered with The Economist. And they have an analytical unit that just collects data. And it was a food security index. And they went out to something like 130 countries. They had like 7 different measures of food security. And they track it over time. Is it improving or not improving? Because the issues in Tanzania might be absolutely totally different than what it is in Botswana. And it may have to do with water, it could have to do with soil conditions, it could have to do with transportation, how they get it to market. It could have to do with the trade policies of the country and what happens there. So, every year this comes out, 2016 I guess came out in May, and they talked about where it's improving and where it's not improving and what are the factors that are affecting it. And I think that's knowledge goes a long way to helping companies, countries make the right decisions about moving forward.
And speaking of new technologies and countries making the right decisions, let's talk about GMOs, which you've called a first world problem.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Well, you can't help it.
And by the way, you're on the same page as Bill Gates about that.
And he's an interesting, because I was on a panel with him at the World Economic Forum right before I became CEO. So it was like 8 years ago. And he and I were sitting in the green room waiting to go out, and the president of Tanzania is there, other people are on this panel. And he wasn't an advocate yet. And he said, but what we did talk about is, he said, I'm going to dig into it, and I'm going to figure it out for myself. No, I said, well, if you are experts, we'll, let you into our laboratories, anything you want. And he said, no, let me go do it my way. And a couple of years later, I ran into him again, and he was clearly a convert. He said he'd looked into it. You can't feed the world without technology. And genetic modification and the way it was going about and happening is a great opportunity to create more yield with less inputs. And the next big thing is going to be water. Water issues around the world are looming large.
Critical.
And, it is. It's, there's been, 25 years of data and no known health effects. And you're right, with first world, we have more choices, and we can choose to or not to. And I do believe that it should be labeled. People should understand.
You do think it should be labeled?
I do. I don't think they should put a skull and crossbones on it, which is what some of the suggestions were. I do think that people have a choice, but it's a first world problem. And you have to understand that if you choose to not use it, you'll be paying more. And if the industry, things like this state-by-state labeling was just going to cost the food industry a ton of money, well, who's going to pay for that? We are, right? And maybe we can afford it, but I can tell you people in India, people in sub-Saharan Africa, people in the rural sections of Latin America can't. And they need every leg up they can to exist, to create, nutrition for them. And it's just not the quantity of food, it's the nutritional content of it as well. And I think the science is getting better there as well.
Any arguments by the anti-GMO folks that is right, that you think has validity?
I don't think it's, the interesting thing is they'll allow farmers to spray Bt on crops and still call it non-GMO. But if you insert a Bt gene into the DNA of the plant, then it's bad. But if it's topical and you're still ingesting it, it's fine. So that was the one that confused me the most. And because it's kind of, I always think it all comes down to the same thing. I think, look, there's the precautionary principle out there that says that you have to be protected from everything. If you subscribe to that, you'd never leave your house. Well, actually, you'd live on a one level. You wouldn't even have stairs. You wouldn't get in a car. right? Because something, might happen kind of thing. We have to test and we have to educate and we have to do a lot of things to make sure that things are safe. But after 2 generations, 25 years, the data's there. Now, this is not something that's brand new. It's been there for a long time.
So you took over as CEO of DuPont like late 2008, 2009, which of course was the big rumblings of the
Lovely timing.
Great Recession.
It was.
As I think you called it, it felt like the world was falling apart. What was that
I was pretty
like?
sure it was. You have 60,000 people looking at you saying, what do we do? You have a board looking at you saying, what are you going to do? And everything I thought I'd do if I ever had the opportunity to lead the company was absolutely not going to work. I mean, it was like, take plan A, open the drawer, put it in, maybe someday we'll get back to that. Because it was about surviving. And for us, surviving was, we had to downsize the company and idle, but not shut it down, but we had to idle a lot of assets. We had to send a lot of people home.
Well, you had to lay off a lot.
We did. We sent a lot of people home.
You had to, yes.
Thousands of people.
Yes, that must have been difficult.
In 4 waves.
Wow.
Because it wasn't clear how deep it was going to be. We had our polymers business lost 50% of its volume in 3 months.
And polymers go into...
It's plastics going into cars or toys or computers or anything like that.
Lost 50%?
50% of its
in
volume.
3 months, you said?
3 months. September, October, November. September, emerging markets, which were going great guns at that time, were growing at like 20%. Our volumes were up 20%. In October, they were dead flat.
October, so we're talking about October 2008?
08, right.
Okay.
In November, it was minus 20%. But then I had an ag business which didn't have a global financial crisis. Because the ag cycle is different than the industrial cycle. So they were farmers were still planning. That was still going. They weren't buying any machinery because they didn't know about the banks. But it was liquidity. Could we generate enough cash to pay our people? Could we generate enough cash to pay our dividend? Because we, with our cash situation globally in the United States, we were in and out of the commercial paper market every week and to kind of true up cash balances and stuff like that. And it was not clear at some point in the first quarter whether that window would be open or not. And so there were so our mantra was, we have to generate cash. And I really felt that, so we did a couple of things that I thought were really interesting. I give my team a lot of credit for coming up with this. They came in one day and they said, we can cut everybody's pay in the United States and Japan 10%. I said, really? We can? Yes. And we can't do it anywhere else in the world. Why not? Because it's not legal to do it anywhere else in the world. So I said, bad idea. Why should the US and the Japanese, bring me a global solution, not, and they said, no, there's real money here. I said, I'm sure there is, but go rethink it. And so they came up with an idea of voluntarily taking 1 week off in the second half of 08, or actually it was 09, second half of 09, voluntarily take a week off without pay. Nobody was going to check, and I asked the leadership, the senior leaders, take 2 weeks off without pay. And we all took 2 weeks off without pay, but we all worked because who wanted to stay home?
Yeah, right. Got
but 80% of the people at DuPont globally took a week off without pay.
Wow.
80%. And nobody was going to check you. Nobody could, if you were a single parent and you just couldn't afford it, nobody was going to say a word. But we put in the payroll system, when you have to log in and log your hours kind of thing, or vacation or not vacation. We just put a thing in there, and then we could track it globally, but we couldn't see whether you did it and I didn't or whatever.
Right.
And we had 80%. And it was a rallying cry because a couple of things happened. It enabled us to generate enough cash that we didn't, we stopped the last layoff of 500 people, and 400 and some people, and we put them in classrooms and retrained them in supply chain that would help us get more efficient so that we could grow
Generate more
as
cash,
it would do.
revenue.
So I really felt great that the team had done that, and there was a real morale booster there. It
So
really
what did
was.
you learn? What's the lesson out of this for leading in crisis?
I think people want to know what they can do to help. I mean, there was a huge amount of fear. And so you just had to tell them what was important, and it was simple. Generate cash, stay close to your customers, but don't travel. You can call them, because we can't afford the airfare. Yeah. Stay close to your customers, generate cash, meaning keep your inventories low, make sure you're analyzing all this stuff. Get out, talk to your people, and get your people focused on what they could do to help. And, there was a real hesitance to do that because, the fear was that, I'd be next, I'd be laid off next kind of thing. So we had to quell that fear and we couldn't make any promises because we didn't know, right? But we had to quell the fear and get people focused on what they could do. The other thing that I think helped is that I woke up one morning, literally in April of 2009, and realizing that I had laid off about 12% of the general population of the company, and I hadn't laid off one leader. I hadn't laid off, of the top 400 people in the company, I hadn't laid anybody off. And so that didn't feel good. It didn't feel right. So I brought in the leadership of the company, top 26 people, and I said, take out 50% of your leadership.
50?
50.
50?
Yeah, shock and awe, really, it helps. Well, if you tell them 10%, they'll go eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Okay, if you tell them 50%, they have to think differently. So I had one guy come in, he threw himself on my desk. I am serious. He's Greek, and so it's emotional guy, and he swore I was destroying his world by doing anything, and I told him very nicely to go back and try again. I had a guy that came in and cut exactly 50%. It made no sense at all, but he was just very happy. And I had a guy come in and say, look, we got these two businesses. We can merge them into one business. We get the same supply chain, same this, same that. You only need one leader. You only need one finance person. You only need one manufacturing person, one supply chain person. And oh, by the way, I think the leader should be me because I think I'm that good. And I won't mention any names because I have several ex-DuPonters in the audience who probably know exactly who I'm talking about. But, and so what we ended up doing is taking out 12% of the leadership of the company. And we did it by consolidating businesses. We had 23 businesses. We ended up with 13 defined businesses, leadership structures. We took out an entire layer of leadership. So we had me, then we had EVPs, and we had group VPs, and we had VPs. And it's like, that's like one too many, so took out one. Everybody had a different idea about which level I should take out. That was the other interesting one. But I really felt that by streamlining it down and making it simpler, it was going to help in the recovery, and it did.
What was the hardest moment during all of this, and how did you cope?
There were a lot of really...
or was it just such a blur? You're just
I think
to catch up with everything.
Every event, every time we had to go out, and there were 4 of them, and announce layoffs, I wake up that morning, if I slept at all, with a huge knot inside me. And because I had to go tell our people, I had to go tell our investors, and it all falls on the leader. And there was nobody else that can do it. I had a great team that helped me craft the messaging and things like that. But there's not many ways to pretty that up.
Yeah. Right?
And that was really hard because if anything is true at DuPont, I mean, these are people, you know them, you know their families, this is not just, and they're looking at you like you've just, destroyed them. And that's really hard because there was a lot of personal relationships that were impacted by that.
So a few years later, you had a very difficult time personally at DuPont where an activist investor, Nelson Peltz, took out after you and the board.
Do you think the full-page ads in the Wall Street Journal saying how bad I was were fun?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Was that fun?
Yeah, my children enjoyed that too.
So, my Fortune colleague and partner, Patty Sellers, has written that Nelson Peltz and other activist investors actually see women CEOs as prey. That this was, I don't know if you ever felt that, but talk about how you dealt with that.
It was interesting because you could see it building in the general business world. because these guys have, there's a lot of cash in the world chasing outsized returns. So if I put it in an active investor, a passive investor, a hedge fund, an activist fund, where am I going to make the most money? So these are huge pension funds, sovereign wealth funds. There's a lot of money chasing returns, right? So they're all trying to outdo each other. And so you got yourself into a situation where even the active investors were siding with the activists because what could it hurt? What could it hurt to have somebody who, and so, when we'd be out preaching.
And I realize with this audience, could you step back just a little bit and explain an activist investor and what they're trying to achieve?
Yes, so they believe that most boards are sleepy and most leadership teams aren't driving as hard as they could and aren't as tough on cost and things like that. And they believe they can go in and be part of the board and demand change to create a higher stock price in a short period of time. So
that they will make a lot of money on.
They will make a lot of money. They invest in the company, a couple of percent. They'll buy a couple of percent of the company. They'll go on CNBC and go out and talk to everybody about how bad management is and how great they are. And it feels like a war. And it was a war.
It was a war.
It was a war. And so, we put our decks together about how, great we are, and if, there were mistakes made, obviously, and so why things like that, they put their decks together about how great they are, and I chose to not go on TV, to not go out into the press. I chose to go directly to our shareholders. So I spent the majority of 2015 between January and May on planes around the world, and it was irrational flying. Denver, then San Francisco, then Dallas, then New York, then back to San Francisco, maybe up to Portland, because it was when you could see them and when they'd grant you an audience kind of thing, which was fine.
So it was basically like a political campaign where you're trying to keep your investors on your side rather than his side.
It absolutely was. And it came down to, they make it personal, and I'm not the only CEO they've gone after personally.
How did they make it personal with you?
So I had stock options that were expiring in the next 18 months, and there's something, because I always have inside information, there's something called a 10.5B plan that allows it to actually monetize those stock options if the stock hits a certain price or on a certain date or whatever. So we use them in order to not lose value on stuff that I was granted, 10 years ago kind of thing. And one hit right before he launched his proxy war. So obviously I'm not committed to the company because I sold stock. No, actually I didn't sell stock. I exercised stock options. You're not, I said, I was out 90% of my personal wealth is in the DuPont company. I mean, I was not good at, what every investor tells you to do, which is have a broad portfolio. I ignored that stuff. We do understand they went through the garbage at my house.
Seriously?
Yeah. We had.
Did you see them going through your garbage?
There was one of the policemen in the neighborhood. There was a policeman that kind of patrols the neighborhood. So he came up and was asking or was chatting me up one day and said, did you change waste services? I said, no. So, well, there was another guy in there, at 5 o'clock in the morning, and can you tell him not to be in there? It's like, so I called my waste service, and they said, no, we weren't there. And so why would anybody pick up my garbage?
Right.
Very boring, by the way.
Yeah.
Very boring. I lead an amazingly boring life because the only thing he could find in digging, and my children, me, my husband, anything, was that the stock options exercise.
Well, he found it
the stock
in
option,
the trash?
No, but he found that because of SEC
say,
filings,
okay.
and so
that
was the full page ad in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times and other outlets about how terrible I was.
Right.
Yeah.
And you ultimately won.
I did.
But then you retired. How much did the proxy war play into your retirement?
So in many respects, the fun was gone.
The fun was gone.
Yeah, so these jobs aren't easy. These jobs are tough. And you got to get up in the morning with a passion and a desire to do it, or it's not right for you, it's not right for the company. He came back and threatened another proxy contest. And at that point made me very personally the center point of it. And at that point, I felt that it was bad for the company. And I would always promise myself there was one thing, it's hard for CEOs to exit. It's one of the hardest things. You know how it's hard to get off stage? You don't want to stay too long, but you don't want to leave too early. It's really hard because for the most part, you're so passionate about the company and what you're doing. And
this is a company that was your life for decades.
Yeah, 27 years,
yeah.
Right. But I became the issue, and that's not good for anybody.
So how'd you make that decision?
It's just...
What did you do that day, that week, before you made the decision?
So talk to the board a lot, talk to the lead director, talk to the board a lot. And, it was clear that the board, that another proxy contest was not going to be a good thing for the company. And at that point, I just had to do what was right for the company and what was right for me. And so came to an agreement with them that I would retire.
Difficult moment, I imagine, very difficult.
Yeah, because I couldn't tell anybody. I couldn't talk to my husband.
You couldn't?
I really felt that, yeah, he was surprised. And he was out of town too, and he was with his sister driving across Idaho, and I'm like, okay, you can't tell your sister because it's not public yet. So, and I think, it was hard on the kids, because I didn't tell anybody. And the only people I talked it over with was my general counsel and my CFO, and kind of thing. And
what did your kids and your parents and your husband say when they found out?
They really felt that if that was the right thing for me, then that was the right thing.
Right.
Right. And so there was total support.
Yeah.
Because I think they saw how tough the year and a half had been of the issues with the activists.
So let's go back to this question of activist investors potentially targeting women CEOs as prey. They target a lot of people, but whether they... And let's go back also to the fact that I think it's Fortune 500 women CEOs has dropped because of you.
I know.
And a couple
Sorry
others,
about that.
From,
yeah.
what are we... I don't have the numbers right in front of me. Was it 24 to 21? Yes. 24 CEOs, women CEOs to 21, 4.2%. So we've gotten up. We got up to 24, we're back down to 21. We have the question of women board members. I was just at a session, first half of today, with the 30% Club, which is trying to get more women on boards.
By the way, that's been really good for me. I've got a lot of interest in
yeah, that's a tremendous potential there. But let's just talk about the CEO route, because I'm always fascinated by this kind of this pyramid question where women start at the bottom of the pyramid, easily 50 to 60%. Women get more college degrees than men, and STEM is a whole different issue. But as you go up an organization, you start seeing women drop out of the leadership path. What is your perspective on that? Is it more difficult? What were the kind of challenges for you?
So I think, in looking back on it, and I'm working with a group of women on something called Paradigm for Parity, and we're engaging with CEOs now. It's not been publicly announced yet, but we're talking about it more publicly because we believe that the 30% Club is great. Boards should have at least 30% women, but that's not going to solve the problem if you don't get the pipelines inside companies moving. And we've looked at a lot of data, we've looked at a lot of research, and one of the things that really struck us was around the area of unconscious bias. And this hit me in the last year before I left DuPont. We were doing unconscious bias training for our people. It was part of trying to improve our own numbers in diversity, and it's real. It is absolutely real. If you look at, there's 1,000 different examples of it every day. I'm bossy. I'm too aggressive. I was told. How many times I was told I was too aggressive? How many times do you think a guy was told he was too aggressive? Right? It just doesn't happen. And I do think that unconscious bias training is one of the most eye-opening things I personally went through.
So it was training to show your biases.
It was, and you
them.
do it in small groups, natural work groups. We did it in our natural work groups, and it was a lot of open conversation around it. And, there were people who brought up things like, is my weight the barrier kind of thing, or people that brought up things about, whether it's race, national, where it came from, gender. And, and so it was interesting to hear the different perspectives and to have people kind of, you go through some self-assessment and this and that and the other thing, and realize I carry biases. I make assumptions. And I think that's one of the pivotal things. I think companies need to measure it. I think they need to measure it at all levels. I think they need to find out if the numbers aren't where they are, then the exit interviews, things like that. A lot of companies are moving to gender-blind resumes. So you cannot tell in the resume if it's a man, a woman, what country they came from, what race they are, anything. We just did something simple 10 years ago by saying you have to have a diverse slate. You can't make a decision without a diverse slate. And first we did it from a director level and up, and then we did it at a manager level and up, and our numbers improved. But it was kind of like a blip, and then it flattened out again. And so I do think that there's some very simple things companies can do, but if the intent isn't coming from the top, if it's not a priority of the CEO and the senior leadership, it's not going to happen.
And what would you, are we going to take questions? We have, yes. You have questions? Pass them to Bev. Love to hear from you. What kind of advice would you give to young people, women in particular, but not just women, aspiring to lead an organization?
Well, so first of all, I think that self-awareness is one of the traits that helped me the most through my senior leadership career and being a CEO.
Self-awareness.
Self-awareness.
That's interesting.
How do others see me?
How do they see you?
Tough, very tough.
Aggressive, we know, bossy. Okay.
Yeah, but no, tough is different. Tough is different,
Okay.
right? And I had to become aware to use that when I needed to. And believe me, there were times I did. And to back off from it when it wasn't really going to help the situation. And I think there's a book on all of us out there of how people perceive us. And do you know, so if you aspire to a leadership position, do you know the book on you? And if you don't like the book on you, what are you going to do about it?
That's excellent.
And
advice.
it's not about telling people that you're really nice. I'm really nice. I really am too, by the way. And but everybody, my husband's a really nice guy, and they always say, well, you just. But and so it's so you have to take those steps yourself in terms of that. But I really felt that becoming self-aware and understanding how people perceived me, good, bad, or indifferent, and focusing on the strengths and trying to figure out the bad parts,
right,
kind of thing.
How far along in your career were you when you did that? Were you CEO by then?
No. I think I was kind of running a business at a vice president level for the first time. So the first time I had a couple of $1 billion P&L. Kind of thing. And I was running a very tough commodity chemical business that was not very diverse. And I had some plant managers who tell me exactly what they thought of me. And so I had to figure out how to win them over without killing them or losing their respect. And so, there was some self-reflection there and understanding that and talking to some people who I'd worked with earlier in my career who I trusted and kind of figure it out. But, the thing is that we all fall, or I won't talk for any of you, but, then you get into a comfort zone and you fall back into your bad habits again.
Right.
And so what's the reminder to
read your book again?
Right.
And you, during the course of your stellar career, you've raised 3 kids, a daughter and a
2
couple
boys.
of twins.
Twins.
Any advice on that front?
I think my children taught me negotiation, empathy. They didn't care. I don't care who you are. I need breakfast. Oh, okay. And guess I got to get up and feed you. But, because I remember when my daughter was, she must have been 5. And Saturday morning, I was just announced as the first woman to lead a business at DuPont at a vice president level. It was a big deal. I mean, it was a big deal. And the woman had never led a multi-billion-dollar P&L at DuPont. And this is like 1994. And that's when I was on the Fortune list for 10 years. Yep. So maybe it was in 95. It was in 95. Anyway, so Mike goes out and gets the paper. We kind of had this Saturday ritual of all the kids in our big bed and watching cartoons and eating evil like Lucky Charms or something like that. And Maggie looks at the front page of the paper and she went, "Mommy, what did you do wrong?" Because my picture was on the front page of the local paper.
How old was she?
5. What did you do wrong? And, so it tells you, it's like nothing. We're trying to say, this is a good thing. No, it's not. I mean, it was like the paper is like, this is only bad things that happen. And at 5, she picks up on that. But I think my children taught me a lot about myself. I think they taught me a lot about the art of negotiation. Just because I tell them doesn't mean they would do anything.
Right.
And that's kind of like some employees I had.
Which raises an interesting question, which goes right to this question. Is a female leading a man's-driven company, as a female leading a man's-driven company, I think it means man-dominated company. Could you compare, is there a difference between female leaders in leadership style? And this person raises the examples I thought was interesting, the layoffs. Sorry, it's also my
Do you mean
my
I felt
eyes.
bad about it and maybe they wouldn't, or what? No.
Well, I think that we as females lead differently because we also lead, I think, with a different confidence. So when you are actually in a very male-driven company and you're the leader and now you're asking them to actually step up and lay people off, I don't know if you have any examples of female leaders that you had the same discussion with that they had to do to laying the people off versus the men.
I think if you made it, the women that led at the DuPont company are a pretty tough group of women. And they had to go toe-to-toe with some very smart, the DuPont company does not lack for IQ. That was never the issue. EQ might have been the issue at times, but it was never IQ. And because I was rarely the smartest person in the world. I had PhD chemists. I had no clue what they did, but as long as they were successful, I was happy. But I do think that if you got to that level, you just know what your job is and you have to do it, right? And when we talk about it, because there a couple times men would come in and say, "This is hard. I don't know if I can do this again." And I said, you got to get it done. We don't have a choice. And when there's an external impetus to it, it's easier than if it's just sort of the company changing its mind about something and selling a division or something like that. It was almost, I think, sometimes the people who we sold to another company, felt just as bad as the people that were laid off because they really felt they were leaving kind of the mothership that had, DuPont had a history of paternalism, taking care of their employees for, a couple of centuries. It gets part of the culture. But. So
is there an age by which you should obtain a leadership role in the corporate environment or be stuck at sort of a marginal role or level? And you talk about the tough women at DuPont. What was the breakout? What made you break out as CEO?
There were a group of us.
Or a CEO candidate, I should say.
I never asked for a lot of permission. I just kind of did things and didn't get me into trouble too many times.
That's
just
important. You didn't ask permission. That's an important thing to say.
That was not something you did at GE, so I kept that one with me. But, I think that, I'm a pragmatic person. And so if I see something that I don't like, I try to figure out how to change it for the better. But you have to do that within a culture that has decades of history and deep love for the company. So you have to honor it. I said early on that you have to honor it in order to change it. And so when I figured out that there was a way to get businesses, product teams, things like that, to move in a direction, and you do it by onboarding them as opposed to dictating to them. And I, was very successful. There was a woman sitting here who did the same thing around sustainability in the DuPont company. Linda Fisher came in from the outside and worked at our competitor at one point in time, oh, God forbid, and was very effective inside the company, changing hard beliefs that sustainability, this is back, I'm talking, 10, 15 years ago, wasn't a priority to being a priority, and really changed the company in a lot of very profound ways. And so, you figured out how to get the work done in a way that brings people with you, then you can create a following.
So the effectiveness, and I realize this wasn't you, but the effectiveness of making that, do you want to raise your hand, our sustainability person?
Linda.
Yes, so, and maybe you can answer this quickly, the bringing sustainability to what was kind of known as a chemical company.
And a big polluter, too.
Give me two pieces, and a big polluter, two pieces of advice on how to make that case.
Part of it was figuring out how to make it relevant to the businesses.
Make it in their interest.
Make it relevant and important to the businesses.
So it's in their interest to change.
As Ellen said, we had 13 businesses, and each one of them was very different. So sustainability to the ag, the seeds business would even be very different from sustainability to the crop protection chemical business from the polymer business. So kind of figuring out where's their market going, how do they take sustainability and build it into their product portfolio, how they're marketing themselves, what's their value chain, what are their customers looking at. So making it relevant to the businesses and how they're going to be successful. So
That's a really good, and you were brought in to do this, you didn't just take it on yourself, you were brought in to.
I was brought on to do it, but I'm not sure everybody understood what it was I was going to do.
What that it was.
And I don't necessarily think I did at the
back
time.
then. Yeah.
Oh, just come on, you'll have fun, it'll be interesting. And it was my predecessor who convinced her to come.
I
and he did a
remember
great
Ellen
job.
saying to me, "We're nice people, you'll like it here."
And then you came to work for us, and maybe we weren't so nice.
So, Ellen, as CEO, were you involved in philanthropy decisions, any association
It was
with
Linda,
the
too. I
DuPont
gave it to Linda.
Foundation? Okay.
No, there's no, DuPont, there's no foundation.
DuPont, no more?
No, that's separate. So
it's separate.
there
Okay,
were
sorry.
3 cousins who got together who bought the company out in a leveraged buyout in like 1906 and went on to create the modern chemical company and just did tremendous, and a lot of invention occurred under their leadership. And, so you've got the Longwood Foundation that deals with education. I don't know if you've ever been to Longwood Gardens outside of Wilmington, Delaware. He was more the horticulturalist. You have Alfred, who was a science guy. He started the Nemours and the Children's Hospital and all of that. And I'm not sure if there was a third one. But so that made it more difficult for us because we didn't have a foundation to funnel people to that was part of the company. And so we did philanthropic ways. We had strategy around it. And because it's important, we felt that we were, in order to be an accepted part of the community, you had to have the community think of you positively. And these were things that maybe, lay off people a couple of rounds over decades,
Right.
That doesn't go well. But our people did a great job of locally in the community and then in places like Wilmington or Des Moines or, other places of using the philanthropy in a way that would help the community, move forward and strive. And it was broad. It was in arts, it was in education, it was in social services, and we were great volunteers. The DuPont employees were phenomenal volunteers. Many of our employees led and or participated in the boards of directors of most of the United Way, social service agencies, the Boys and Girls Club, Easter Seals, you name it. And our people spent a lot of time, nights and weekends and doing things like that. So it was a very giving community, our employees were. So we topped it up with some financial support, but we didn't have a large foundation we could work from.
So there's a quick question. Is there a curriculum for the unbiased,
I'm sure
checking
there
unbiased
is.
reserve?
There's a lot of programs out there if you Google it.
How do they
and you
find
can-
it? Just Google?
Yeah, I
and
would
buy-
just Google it. And because different companies, they'll kind of make it their own, but we used an outside vendor.
Okay.
I can't remember who it was.
So I'm going to botch this name, but Dr. Swaminathan, widely considered the father of the Green Revolution in India and who spoke here several months ago, is advocating for what he calls an evergreen revolution, which prioritizes less use of chemicals in agriculture. Do you support his approach? And if so, what is DuPont's role in an evergreen revolution?
Yeah, so if you think about, it's not about using them or not, it's how much you use and what its impact is on things outside of what it is meant to do. So if it's supposed to kill a sucking insect, right, or a piercing insect, does it have any impact on any other animals? Bugs, things like that. Does it have an impact on humans? So when Rynaxypyr came in, we were thinking it would take, 10 years to hit all the regulatory circuit in every country, because every country you had to do your own tests, your own growth, you're on this, you submit it. It takes a long time. And we went from like 0 sales to $1 billion of sales in like 3-4 years. And, and I kept telling the head of the business that he was sandbagging because he would always blow by his numbers. And the reason is that it would be used in a thimbleful, not in a tank car full. So, of active ingredients. So old chemistries, you throw a lot of it at it. New chemistries, they're diluted and other things are added to it and they're sprayed.
Targeted.
Right, and it's a lot less impact on the environment, much more human friendly. So and plus now there are biologics, so these are naturally occurring things that can have an impact to pest control or fungus control. So there's a lot of research being done in biotechnology, so not chemistry, but think biology, in order to affect the same protection, but with a very different impact on people and the environment.
What bug do you hate the most?
Eat?
Hate the most? What's the most difficult
Oh,
bug
God,
to
I
get
don't
rid of?
remember all their names, but
you
there
must
was,
know all their. You must
None
feel
of
like
them
you're
are very
an
pretty.
entomologist at
Oh, the
times.
stink. Actually, I hate the stink bugs, but I don't know if you have those down here. But in Wilmington, they'd always crawl through the little crevices into my house.
Yeah, but they don't. But in terms of like, what is the? I guess it's sort of a serious question. What is the?
But no, I found them in our laboratories, and we're trying to figure out how to make control their population.
But in terms of it as a danger to crops,
every crop is different.
Okay.
You got army worms, you got a lot of worms out there, you've got a lot of, chewing insects, piercing, sucking insects. They're all different ways to kill them, but fall army worm's bad. There's just a lot of them. And plus, they're different every country you go to. The pest pressure is very different in Brazil than it is in Iowa.
You mentioned becoming self-aware and unconscious bias and you talked about unconscious bias. Could you talk to the young professionals about what you would tell 31-year-old Ellen about navigating your way in a male-dominated company or organization? That wouldn't be this one, of course.
Don't sweat the small stuff.
No.
You angst over a lot of things in life, whether it's, am I spending enough time? So first of all, guilt, okay? So, so when you're a mother of 3 and you're running a business, it's not running the company, running a business, and you're traveling the world. I had one of my sons used to punish me when I travel. So I'd come back in on a Friday night, and he'd run up to me and he'd stop himself, 3 years old. He'd look up, he'd frown, he'd turn around, go like that, and I would have to woo him back. So a little guilt thing going there. So but the thing is, he turned out fine, by the way. He's 22, he's an extrovert, he has no recollection that he ever did that.
The best piece of advice I ever got about being a working mother is, this is from a child development expert, was they smell guilt. Don't give up the scent.
They pounce. They pounce.
So here's another policy question. What do you think is contributing to girls developing early? A lot of people attribute it to what's in our food. What do you think?
I think that's hard because even milk and things like that, there's just a lot of change in nutrition that we don't understand. The thing is that food's cultural, right? And people protect it. But there's a lot of science in food we don't understand. And, how much is too much? You know what they say, you know, my mother had this motto, everything in moderation and you'll be fine, right, kind of thing. And so there are effects of whether it's utilization of antibiotics in animals or things like that, that we just need to understand. And we need to be more proactive about that than reactive. And I do think there's a body of knowledge out there that just needs to be socialized. I mean, there are a lot of institutions, universities, people doing a lot of research in a lot of these areas, but they're not connecting it together. It's sort of like what the president asked Vice President Biden to do with cancer. There's so much research going on about cancer, but it's not connected together. And it's in a lot of these stovepipes, and so it's hard then to integrate, learn from it, and move forward too quickly. But I do think that we make our children afraid of science. Science is getting more complex, and we as a society need to figure out how to teach them science in a way, and I'm talking about starting in kindergarten, that is relevant, like don't build a volcano, you probably won't need to do that in your life. Let's take apart a pump and see how you pump water from a well, right? You might actually be able to use that, but we, you know.
That's interesting. That's a really good perspective. Yeah.
And I'm a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and so since I have more free time, they've decided that I need to help them, and I'm going to chair a program, and it's the National Academy of Science, National Academy of Engineering, on how to train the trainer. So there's been a lot of work done on the curriculum, but nobody's figured out how to get a kindergarten teacher or a third grade teacher comfortable with teaching the curriculum. Right. Yet there are pockets of brilliance out there, and we just don't know how to scale it. So we're going to go out and catalog all of the areas where people are training the trainer. It could be in after-school programs like Boys and Girls Clubs. It could be in certain school districts. It could be in charter schools. There's a lot of different places it could be. And so then how do we aggregate that and really learn from the best and then figure out how to scale that? Because it is, I have a niece who teaches first grade. Now she's moving to fourth grade. She said, Aunt Ellen, the science is real different. Yeah. And I've been teaching first grade for 10 years. So now she had to take time and learn it and teach herself it because there was no real place for her to go. She said math's no problem, the science is really different. And so I do think we need to figure out how to train the trainer, get kids more comfortable.
So as we wrap up here, it turns out that Ellen is not very good at being retired. So as you can tell already, moving into another chapter of life. So just give us a quick peek into your new cool 3D printing thing that you're doing.
So it was sort of like, so the decision came up quickly. I decided to everybody said, take 6 months off. You don't do anything for 6 months. So everybody call, join this board, do this. Okay, no, I'm not gonna do anything. So when's 6 months up? Well, it's kind of in April. And so like the first call out of the box was Alan Mulally who ran forward, and he got something really cool you gotta come help me do. It's like, yeah, he's the best salesman in the world, by the way. We always watch out when Alan calls. So he said, I want you to look at this TED Talk. I want you to think about this. I want you to come to California and meet with some people. So it's a startup called Carbon. It's 3D Carbon. It's 3D printing. And what it is, it's a liquid pool of polymer, and you hit it with a light that's generated from software on whatever 3D object you want to create, and it pulls the part from a liquid pool of polymer. And it's faster than conventional 3D printing. You've got more Z stability than conventional 3D printing. And it looks like between the envelope that you can use, size of the part, the speed, everything, that you can use it in kind of mid-scale manufacturing, not large-scale manufacturing, but it looks like a technology that could really make a difference on the personalization of medical devices. When each one needs to be a little bit different, people like shoe companies like to change up their designs all the time. Can this be a way that they can do smaller lots with more uniqueness in them? You can do it in different colors. You can do it in different materials. It could be flexible materials, it could be rigid materials, and they just have to have the ability to be able to polymerize it through the light. And it's really cool. And it's a guy, I did my due diligence on him, who's running it, a guy by the name of Joe DeSimone. He does the TED Talk, who we knew at DuPont because he was a fluoropolymer scientist at UNC and NC State, PhD guy. He's worked with our people on different things over the years. So, I call my old head of research and say, okay, tell me about this guy. You got to, you do your due diligence. I went out there, I was blown away. I really was. And it's just a lot of fun being part of something that's a startup, that's novel technology, that's going to have an impact. And they just think differently than, I'm used to having huge resources behind everything I did, right? Because of the size and the number of people that I had at DuPont company. Now, I'm flying coach to California, right? Because I'm not going to charge that company a dime more than I need to be on their board. And that's the kind of mentality. And by the way, that's hard. I want you to know. I haven't done that in a while. I have to buy my little salad before I get on everything. I had to learn how to. The hardest part of the transition, going through security at airports.
You never had to do that?
I hadn't never had to do it.
Because you were going on corporate.
I was going on corporate planes.
Wow.
My kids stood back and laughed. They were not very nice about it, but it was a lot of fun. So things like that, so much energy, so different way of thinking about things. It's just, there's so many really cool things that are going out in the world that you have to be open to looking for them and understanding them and seeing what drives your passion. And it's not necessarily the first thing that comes along, because the first thing, you wake up the next morning and you say, I'm not busy, now what am I going to do? Right? I actually read a couple of books, really.
Right, this is good.
Now, it was about Westinghouse versus Edison and the patent wars of 1895, but I thought it really was a page turner, and it was.
Well, Ellen, we are so fortunate that we're not losing your leadership genius to the golf course or something, and that you're moving on to exciting new ventures. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your lessons with us.